I love hardware, always have, and that may sound a little weird coming from somebody who works for a pro audio software company, but every single one of these boxes behind me does something that when I patch it in, it just puts a smile on my face. And we may not all agree on what box does what best, but I feel pretty safe in saying that every one of you watching has something in your collection where you just patch it in, you press play on, your DAW, and you hear the sound coming back through it, and it just sounds right. And that feeling that you get when that happens, that's the feeling I have been chasing for years in software, and especially for saturation. That's one of the things that I feel has never really been nailed. And growing up as a guitar player and using every amp sim on the planet, and there's a convenience, and they all do a thing, and all the usual suspects for saturation all do a thing. But when you either try and stack some of them, or you listen back, there's, at least for me, there's always been if something missing. Like there's either been this movement or the way they stack, they don't quite stack well. And it doesn't mean you can't make great records with this stuff, but there's something different about saturation for me, that when I put a hardware box on it and I put a software thing on it, I always feel like I'm compromising when I use the software. And I kept asking, it's like, is it me? Am I going crazy? And I'm lucky to be surrounded by people much higher up on the pay grade who can explain it to me like a fifth grader. Am I just being picky? And it turns out it's not just me. I know a lot of you feel the same way, but the easiest way I can sum it up is it ends up just being bad math. And it wasn't until we did the 176 tube compressor limiter with Relab, the real-time circuit solving, and I saw what it took to really bring that hardware-like experience, true nonlinear hardware-like experience, and the implications that come with it, the CPU load, all of that stuff, and the amount of research and development that had to go into that product. It took that to make me a believer. And one of the first things that, once I got my hands on that prototype, was, man, if I could just rip out the tubes and transformers of this thing, or we put in a one-to-one kind of mode on it where we could just use it for tube and transformer color. And it turns out I wasn't the only one, right? Once it went out to beta and to even to more users, that was one of the biggest requests we got. Is like, hey, can I just use this for color? So we looked at it as a feature request, going, hey, what can we do? Can we put a mode into this once we got it out the door where we could just use this for harmonic color? First thing we have to do, rip out the feedback loop. We have to deal with a 40 dB gain difference there once we do that. And second, the output section on the 176 was just so heavy. It was the biggest culprit for the CPU hit. We instantly went, okay, no, we got to take this out and treat it as its own thing. And once we started treating it as its own thing, it grew into this idea of what we're now offering to you as the Relab Color Drive. And what this is we took the real-time circuit solving of what went into the 176, and we're using the same variable gain tube stage from that, and put it in a box that is designed for saturation. Every transformer, every tube, the biasing, all reacts in real time. It's not static wave shaping, right? It's not algorithmic guesswork. This is a real-time circuit solver, but set up for saturation. Now, although we're starting with the variable gain circuit from the 176, we're looking at this as the beginning of kind of a harmonic ecosystem where you'll be able to expand on it with future color packs, which will change the circuit under the hood so that you'll be able to change the harmonic characteristics of the saturation that's going on. But I'll walk through the parameters. I'll do some deeper audio examples in other videos and really just explain what's going on with this so that you can understand how to use it, drop it into your session, and just get going, because there's no better test than to use it in your own stuff. But let's go through the parameters first, give you a sense of what's going on, then I'll show you the flow chart and what we're actually doing here. So let's start with the input and output controls. Input is the pre-gain into the entire modeled circuit. Output controls the output level, and it's at the tail end, so it has no impact on the harmonic color of the circuit. It's really there for level matching. And the drive control, that controls the harmonic saturation of the tube stage and the output transformer that's after it. And I'll show you on the flow chart after how the input and the drive controls are strategically placed in the circuit. So you have really fine control as to how you can distort different aspects of this circuit. Now, the color meter is showing you how hard you're driving the analog stage here. It's not a direct representation of THC, but more a way to visually guide you into the sweet spot of the drive circuit that's inside this. Invert polarity, that inverts the polarity inside the analog stage. And for symmetrical signals, you're not going to hear anything, but for asymmetrical signals, it's going to impact how they drive the tube stage. And it's even more noticeable with higher calibration settings. And calibration in this is the tube bias, and we're using the 6BC8 tube from the variable gain section of the 176. Note that when you have the transformer in and calibration at 0, you're going to get primarily odd order harmonics from this thing. And as soon as you touch the calibration, you can dial in those even order harmonics. I'll show you later. Or you take that transformer out and you already have some even order harmonics in there. The crossover sets the frequency of the crossover split before the drive stage, and then we sum it after the drive stage. This is great for when you want to route your low end around the drive stage for a cleaner low end and just focus on adding some harmonics to the mids and the highs. And when you're using this full end wet, this is a great way to keep that low end clean. But for those of you that would use this in a more of a parallel situation, we've included two crossover networks. We have the Linkwitz-Riley, which really sums up to a very flat frequency response, but comes with some of the same phase concerns that you would have in any hardware situation where you're using stuff in parallel. But we've also included this subtractive crossover network that's a bit more phase friendly and would tend to work better when you're dialing this in parallel. So we give you the choice of both depending on how you use this in your workflow. I tend to prefer the Linkwitz-Riley and use it in full wet and use that crossover. But if you're more of a parallel person, I'd probably switch to the subtractive so you're a bit more phase friendly. Again, these are the exact same concerns you would have if you're doing parallel stuff in the hardware world. And now we come to my favorite section of the color drive, and that's the pre and post emphasis filters. We have a tilt filter and we have a high shelf. You have a frequency knob where you can choose where either the tilt or the high shelf work from. And of course, you have a boost and cut control. And this really helps you shape what goes into the color drive, and then we de-emphasize what's coming out. So you can either really lean on those mid to upper harmonics, or you can dial them back and really control the harmonic footprint of this circuit. Let me bring up a couple of diagrams to show you exactly what's going on here. So here we have an image of the high shelf pre and post emphasis. Set to about 1K, 6 dB of boost. The beige line is the pre-emphasis. The red line is the post emphasis or the de-emphasis on the other side. And what this does is it drives more high frequencies into the circuit, so you get more harmonics around, from 1K up. And then we de-emphasize that on the way out. So really all you're doing is altering that harmonic footprint and not altering the tone of the source going through. So even at 100% wet, you're really only changing the color of the harmonics. And conversely, if you do a cut, you see now the red line is on the top, which is re-emphasizing what we cut before the circuit. So again, the net result is just changing the harmonic footprint. And same with the tilt filter. If we're at 1K, we got maybe a 3 dB boost here. You can see that the tilt is cutting the low end a little bit and adding some of the highs. And then the red line is the de-emphasis on the way out. So again, you're only affecting the harmonics and not the original signal. And if we cut, the opposite happens with the tilt filter, right? We get boosted lows going in and cut highs, and then the post-emphasis filter is going to counter that. All you're affecting are the harmonics, and the net result on your original signal is the same. So for me, using this in 100% wet is generally where I stay, using the pre and post emphasis filters and the crossover to do all my work. So now let's take a look at the circuit flowchart so you can see how all this works together under the hood. So we have the input, and I'm going to skip over this for a second and jump to the drive. Remember earlier how I said that the input and the drive are strategically placed? Well, this is because of this input transformer right here. The input allows you to either drive or ease off that input transformer independently of the drive control driving the tube stage and the output transformer if you have it in the circuit. We also have the inverse drive here. That counteracts what you're doing on the drive control to keep this at unity gain as much as possible so you can just focus on the color it's adding to the circuit. We have the mix control, which blends all of the harmonic color back into the circuit. And then we have our emphasis and de-emphasis filters and our crossover split and crossover sum. Now we'll take a look at what's going on in our old friend plugin doctor here. So you can just see some of the impact the controls have on the harmonics of this thing. So as I mentioned earlier, with the transformer in and the calibration at 0, you see that it's primarily odd harmonics that you're going to get out of this thing. And watch what happens as soon as I touch the calibration knob. Oh, look at those guys. Now we have the even order harmonics being blended in, and you can crank those up by continuing to change the bias. There you go. It's still going to be primarily odd leaning. That's a function of this circuit, and it's also why we're going to add expandable circuits in the future so that you can get something that's maybe a bit more even order, which gives you a totally different color. Okay, now let's take a look at what the pre and post emphasis filters can do to the harmonic footprint of the color. So I have a tone going through at about 1K, and I've got the tilt filter engaged, and I have the kind of pivot point at 300 hertz. And this is to really show you what the impact of that tilt filter is going to have on these harmonics. So if I add gain to this tilt filter, what that does is that brings up the high end and kind of lowers the low end at the same time, just like any tilt filter would. Now watch what happens to the high harmonics. If I just crank that up, look at those just start to all come up. So you really see how much impact that filtering has just on that harmonic footprint of this thing. If I go the other way, right, they really come down and it really starts to emphasize those early harmonics in that series. So hopefully this gives you some insight as to how powerful all of those parameters and controls are and what you can do even just with the harmonic footprint of this one circuit, right? You can use this as light as you would for something like analog summing or even some very subtle console type color on channels and buses, all the way to, full blown tube crunch where you might put something in parallel on a snare drum just to really, add some energy underneath. So it becomes about not just adding, extreme dirt and color. I think the beauty of this plugin is in the subtlety of which it can add. And I think the more you use it and the more you explore it, I think the more you'll appreciate that and how it really brings tracks to life. And like I said earlier, Color Drive is now the beginning of what I like to call a harmonic ecosystem, where as we build more and more flagships using this real-time circuit solving, we could take some of the more colorful aspects from those circuits and offer them up as new color packs to extend the functionality of Color Drive over time. Now, enough of me talking about this. What I hope you do is just download this for yourself, try it on the material you know, in an environment you know, so you can appreciate some of the more subtle aspects of what the color drive can bring to, either channel color or bus color, or, some of the heavy-handed stuff that you would expect you'd get from driving a tube circuit. But I think that's the best way to really just understand what's going on with this thing. And now that you know a little bit about what's going on under the hood, you can start with some of the presets, mess with those as a starting point, and then just explore what this thing can do for you. And of course, the big question is going to be, how much is this going to cost? Good news there. MSRP on this is going to be 79 bucks. If this is your first product with Relab, only $49 in the intro sale. It's $29 if you already have a product from us. And as a thank you to all the early adopters of the 176, anybody that did the 176 in pre-sale or in the intro period, you're going to get this for free on us. It's a thank you for taking a chance on an approach to plugin design that I think is really moving us into a new era of hardware in software form. It's no lie that this is my absolute favorite plugin that we've done to date, and, I'm hoping that we can grow this into this huge ecosystem to satisfy my saturation addiction and, just, keep getting different colors as we do more flagship products. So, download this thing, try it out for yourself. I hope you like it, and I'll see you in the next one.